Hi, guys. Welcome to Dead by Tomorrow interviews. My name is Daniel Winter, and my co host is Andrew Monroe. As we explore different topics that are worth thinking about today, we want to bring in guests to share their own unique perspective. We hope you enjoy hearing from our guests as much as we enjoy talking to them.
Hello to our beautiful listeners. Thank you for coming back to another episode of Dead by Tomorrow. We have an extra special guest this time around, and I know, Daniel and I think all of our guests are very special. But in this case, he actually has his own Wikipedia page. So Brandon Friedman is joining us. He is a writer, an author, and a political activist in a sense. He worked for the Obama administration and did some really cool stuff there. And then most importantly, or at least why we found Brandon and how all of this started, was he is the owner of Rakkasan Tea, which is a tea company in Dallas, just down the street from Daniel. And it is a really, really cool concept that they're doing. They're doing some really interesting, unique things with importing hard to find and really delicious teas. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Brandon. Thank you so much for coming on. And would you want to jump into the book a little bit? I think it was called something like The War I Wished For. And I promise I actually know what it was called, but I'm just too excited. My mind's going a little blank on me. So what was the writing experience like? Was it a seamless transition from the military to writing a book? Do you do it at the same time, or how did that work?
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. The book was called The War I Always Wanted. So after I finished school, I went into the military, and then when I got out of the military, I wrote the book. And I wouldn't call it seamless at all. It was a pretty, a lot of people, as you can expect, a lot of time when you've spent, a good bit of time in combat, that transition can be a little rocky, sort of going back to being just a regular civilian. But for me, I wrote the book, and actually the book was quite cathartic. It was something really good to have done after living through that and experiencing that. So I've always tried to get other people who've been through pretty heavy stuff, write about it, because it's a really helpful process. So I never intended to write a book. When I got out of the Army and I moved to Dallas, I had one of my undergraduate professors who I had written my undergraduate history thesis for. He's a military historian. He was like, "You got to write a book." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to write a book. I have no idea how to write a book. I'm not interested in writing a book." And he's right. "Well, just write a few stories. Tell me a few things that happened and write them out." And so I wrote a few stories about stuff that happened. And he was like, "You really got something here." And I was like, I don't know. He was like, "Let me call around and see what I can do." So this guy started calling book agents, and he found Jim Hornfisher, who's done a lot of military memoirs and military history books, and sort of piqued Jim's interest. And Jim called me. And once I started working with the agent, I just kind of went from there, because my agent was also a former book editor. So he really knew the industry, knew what he was doing. And he just walked me through the process of creating a book. And I didn't, Andrew, you've written a book. There's a whole business side of it that I didn't really understand or know even existed. I just thought, you wrote your stories and then they published it and then they sold it in Barnes & Noble, whatever.
Yeah, if only it was that easy where you could just get to write the book and just be like, "Hey, I'm done," and everybody gets to buy it. And yeah, it gets a lot more complicated, especially after you write the book.
Yeah, there's this whole business side of it. And that was sort of my first foray into business, turning the book into actually a product, not just my story, but a product that would sell and that sort of thing. But just writing the book was really cathartic, and it was really good. And I don't know if I would be where I am today if I had not worked through everything and sort of gotten it out that way.
So it sounds like the book really originally was something that you wrote for you. That was kind of the objective of it. And then it kind of struck a chord and was something that turned out to be relevant to others as you went through that. And so now that you have learned that it sounds like you have a knack for storytelling, is that something where you intend to go back and write a book about some of your other experiences post-military, or is the focus completely now on the tea business?
Well, right now the focus is 100% on the tea business. I would eventually like to go back to writing, but I've always been a risk taker, and I have a tolerance for risk that would allow me to start a business. But that tolerance for risk does not extend into being an author. It's scary to be a writer. It's hard to make a living as a writer. And so I decided after I wrote the first book that I wasn't going to be a writer professionally. Like, that wasn't going to be my career. My plan now is, once I become wealthy and retire and have lots of money, then hopefully I can get back to writing, which may never happen, but I can always dream.
Hey, that sounds like my plan too. So
yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, opening up a tea business, there are a lot of places where you could do that. What made Dallas the place that you wanted to come to start that next chapter?
So a couple things. I'm from Shreveport originally, and have always had a lot of family in Dallas, and spent a lot of time in Dallas when I was a kid. But in 2009, we moved up to DC, to Virginia, to the DC area for work, and spent 8 years there. Had a son, and in late 2016, after the election, things weren't looking too good for me politically, professionally in 2016 after that election. And we had to decide, like, do we want to stay here? Do we want to raise our son here in Virginia to be a Virginian? And this is just where we live, away from family and my parents and all that. Or do we go back to Dallas, which is really my wife and I, it's sort of both of our adopted home? Or do we go back to Texas and raise him there? And I never felt at home in Virginia or DC. I always loved DC. Ever since the first time I went there, I was 12 years old and just fell in love with the city. But I never really felt like that was my home. And I was just never comfortable with the idea of raising my son there. So all things sort of pointed back to moving here to Dallas. And then at the same time, when I wanted to make this transition into running a tea company, it's also going to be a lot cheaper to do it here than in the DC area. You can just get bigger spaces and there's just more room to do stuff, and it's not quite as expensive. So there were a few variables that all just sort of aligned, and we decided to move back here in 2017 and start the company.
That is really cool that you're able to come back to Dallas. We obviously love Dallas because it's a cool city. And personally, I'm pretty excited that you're doing the tea stuff there. So, with that said, how are you balancing being the CEO of this company along with what, as far as I can tell, is a fair bit of writing on the political scene for, I think it was some New York company. So, how does that work for you? And how does running a company and everything, swap your time around and all that kind of jazz?
The only time I write a lot for Twitter. I write a lot for that company, but no, otherwise, until, the tea business has gotten so busy, but up until 6, 8 months ago, about once a month, I was writing for the New York Daily News. And I would write sort of a regular opinion column for the Daily News. And I would do it, every 4, 6, 8 weeks, I'd write something. I haven't written anything in probably several months just because it's been crazy.
I know you're saying that like in the last, 6 months, you haven't really written much, but I have some really bad news for you. That's kind of like the standard that most writers kind of don't do. So I shouldn't have to be the one to break this to you, but it sounds like you're actually a writer. Even if it's not a book, but you're doing like this political stuff that you're writing, and therefore you are a writer. So sorry, man.
Yeah, so I tried to quit. I tried to just get out of politics. Like after 2016, I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to move back to Texas, going to start a tea company, and that's it. I did my 8 years in politics, and that'll be it. But it just sucks you back in, and so I've continued writing political columns. I get pretty mouthy on Twitter about it, but that's it. It's mostly therapy for me. It's mostly about me. A lot of times I'll forget that Twitter is even public because I'm just like venting. I'm just like letting it out. And then, somebody will come up to me and they'll say something like, hey, I know you from Twitter. I saw you on Twitter. And I get this like sense of horror, like, oh my God, like they saw that. And then I realize that like, everybody who follows me sees that. It's just funny.
Yeah, me too. I have a lot of people that recognize me for my social media presence and writing. I have the exact same problem. It's really cool that we share that problem of people recognizing my writing.
Well, they don't recognize, but hold on, they don't recognize any like my real writing. Nobody's ever come up to me and been like, oh, I know you from your New York Daily News columns, or I know you from your book. No one ever says that. It's always just the sarcasm on Twitter.
Now, one thing I have to ask is somebody who I've been in Dallas for almost 8 years now, and I kind of want to know, maybe you're the right person to ask because I haven't found anybody who can help me with this, but have you heard of the Trinity River project at all?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Is this trying to turn the Trinity River into the Riverwalk with all the
Yeah.
space down there under the bridges?
Yeah. It's supposed to be like a Central Park kind of thing. Do you know who we need to talk to make that happen?
Start with your city council person and then any really uber wealthy people you know.
I've been going to a lot of Mavs games recently, so maybe one of these days I can like bump shoulders with Mark Cuban and just slip him a
This
note.
stuff takes it takes public-private partnerships, and this is not something like the city of Dallas is just going to have the money laying around to do. And so even if the council, the city manager, the mayor, they want to do that, there would have to be a ton of investment and buy-in from the private sector. So yeah, like somebody like Mark Cuban, get him interested in a few real estate investment firms, and he might be able to do something like that. But that would be, I mean, that would be great. That's such a empty, vast plot of land.
Yeah, where my office is at, we're in the Bank of America Plaza, about 50 stores up. And so
Yeah.
we can see it. And I look all the time and I'm like, man, it'd just be so great to have that kind of beautiful space right there. That's always been my one gripe with Dallas is I feel like it doesn't have that kind of really cool park space or outdoor, like something like a river, a mountain, or whatever it is. I love the city, but that's one thing I always feel like it's missing.
Yeah. No, I went down there one day. We went down there and took a walk, and it's just very empty. Like that, there's no other word to describe it.
Yeah.
It's just empty. And I don't know. It's scenic, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brandon, you've had a pretty varied career from everything I can tell. You were in the military for a hot minute. You did the whole political activist or writing. I really don't know how to refer to that, so sorry for butchering that. And you ran a marketing firm, it seems, and all these other things, and none of it really seems to point towards opening a tea shop. So how did that come about?
Yeah, this is a long story. Let's dive in. So like I said, I'm from Louisiana, and everybody drinks iced tea or sweet tea. I always hated that growing up. I just thought it was gross. I don't recall ever even really being aware of hot tea, of just even the idea of hot tea. Maybe I had some vague idea of, British tea time and high tea in England and big hats and all that. But that was sort of, I never really gave it much thought. And then when I was in the Army, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in the early part of the century, and we didn't do anything with anybody over there unless it was over tea. And to me, that was not something I'd ever experienced. Like anytime we had a meeting with locals, or we were planning a mission with the Kurdish Peshmerga or something like that, everything was done over tea. And for me, that sort of those moments where everything was calm and we could sit there and socialize with people in their towns, in their cities, and be friendly and social and do it over tea. It was almost like this oasis amid all the chaos of combat and war. And so I fell in love with that idea of tea being a social drink, something that you do with friends, and something that promotes conversation and just being comfortable with people you like, or even doing it by yourself, but just something to chill out and drink tea. And it was great for that environment. And then when I got out of the military, I wanted to recreate that. But when I got out, I moved to Dallas, I realized there was none of that here. There was no tea culture. There was not even really anywhere I knew of to go find like good loose leaf tea, which is what they drink in most of those places. And all you could find here on the store shelves was tea bags and Lipton and all that. And so I had to hunt down like bags of like good tea from wherever, China, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, wherever. And it took a while, but I really enjoyed it. And I sort of learned to make tea and kind of got back into it here. But then I went into this career. I started writing, and I got embarked on this career in politics, and just that was it. Like I drank tea occasionally, but I didn't really go anywhere with it. And then when I decided to move on from politics 10, 12 years later, I was looking for something to do. Well, let me back up here a little. So after I'd left the administration, I started a PR firm with one partner. We did that for about a year and a half and decided that we hated it. So so my dad's cousin was like, why aren't you selling a product? Like, why are you selling services? And I was like, I don't know. I don't have an MBA. I don't even know what you're talking about. So he was like, yeah, you need to sell a product. And I was like, okay. I don't know anything about this. But so my business partner and we started thinking about it, and she drank tea, and I sort of had this idea. I don't know if you guys have seen Black Rifle Coffee. So it's a military-owned coffee company, for those who don't know. And they get, they're kind of crazy, they get funny. They're very conservative, but that's their shtick. That's how they sell their product. And I got an idea from that, and I was like, I don't want to be the Black Rifle of tea, but there's something there. There's something there. And I realized that there was a lot of really good artisanal tea that was being produced in conflict zones and post-conflict countries that wasn't reaching the U.S. market. Almost all the tea that you buy here in the U.S. comes from, the premium tea comes from like China, Japan, and India. And then you'll get a lot of the stuff you get in tea bags that you don't even know where it's from. A lot of that comes from Argentina or Kenya. But I realized there were a lot of countries that the U.S. had been involved in combat in that were sort of emerging from underneath this shadow of warfare. And they were producing really great loose leaf tea. They had these great tea makers, but they weren't reaching the U.S. market. You can't find it here. You can't get Burmese tea here. You can't get tea from Vietnam, Bangladesh, Colombia. It's just rare. And tea is very much like wine in that The terroir impacts it a great deal. So much like you might enjoy California wines or Italian wines or French wines, and they're all very different. There's always somebody who's very attracted to the idea of a Chilean wine, or a Romanian wine or something like that they've never had. So I got this idea that we could do the same thing with tea. We could go into some of those other countries and help those tea farmers reach the U.S. consumer market. And what it does is it promotes peace and economic development in those countries, helps those farmers reach the U.S. market, but it also brings American tea enthusiasts, it gives them access to greater diversity of teas and brings tea here that people a lot of times have never had. It's really good stuff. So that was the idea. My original business partner, who I started the PR firm, decided to stay in DC, and I picked up my current business partner, who was somebody I'd been in the Army with, and he was here in Texas. And we just went from there and tried to make a company out of it, and that's sort of what we're doing now.
That is absolutely awesome, because you're right. There's not a lot of teas that you can actually get that are different, and finding something unique and kind of what you guys offer is just, it's really hard. You are the only people I know of that have what you are offering. So I love it.
I love that journey. I actually recently, as a part of a course, went through this study that took a look at the way that coffee has sort of gone from a commodity to a good to a service to being an experience, and how Starbucks took something that is a commodity, coffee, right? Like you can, the amount of coffee that it takes to fill up your Starbucks cup probably costs 2 or 3 cents, but you pay like $5 for it because it's all about the experience. And so it sounds like you're trying to take that same approach with tea in the market here in Dallas, which you're totally right. There's a lot of coffee experiences to be had in Dallas, but I don't think there really are a lot of tea experiences. And so are you building that experience primarily through the online marketing, or do you have a tea shop where people can come in and kind of experience what it's like to do like what you were saying, where you meet over tea and you have that calm and that type of experience? What are you going for here?
We're trying to share that experience, and tea education is a big part of what we do in terms of educating our customers and teaching them tea culture and how it's different all around the world and how to make tea and all this stuff. We have been very slow to create like a tea shop experience ourselves. Right now, we are 95% an e-commerce company. We sell online. We have a small space. However, we did just sign a lease for a much bigger space here in Dallas. That space is, to start, it's going to be mostly just our facility for processing tea, but we are going to have a retail space up front. So we will, for the first time, probably around the 1st of April, open the door and have a front door with a sign outside so people can come in and buy tea from us directly from our will essentially be a tea store. Now, we're not going to start off by having it be a tea room where you can actually come in and order a tea and sit down and do all that. We're taking baby steps here.
Yeah, is that a long-term goal to be able to have a tea room, or is it really mostly focused on that distribution and your experience is really helping people to understand, like you're talking about, the loose leaf tea and really the art behind tea, and then also a lot of where it comes from?
Yeah, the tea rooms aspect of this would always be peripheral. We're looking to build out the company to be a fairly prominent e-commerce tea company. So that's where the focus is. But at the same time, for example, you're never going to see us set up a chain. You'll never see like Rakkasan tea shops all over the country or something. We're not only could I probably not do that, but it's just not something we're interested in. But we do want to have at our central one location, we do want to have space to hold events, hold educational events, have people come in, potentially maybe have an attached tea room where people would come in and order a cup of tea, that sort of thing.
And then if somebody else down the road wants to take the tea that you guys are procuring and open up the space, is that something where you see potential for a partnership on something along that line, being like a supplier?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it. We do sell to some, we are on store shelves, our canisters. We do sell those to some stores. Yeah, anybody who wants to buy our tea, we're not opposed to that, obviously. So if somebody wanted to buy our tea and turn it into a tea room, then sure.
So really how I'm kind of seeing what you guys are doing is you're less of the Starbucks coffee shop thing, which is, kind of a dime a dozen at this point. And you're more going for the almost like a brewery method. There's Martin House over in Fort Worth, kind of in y'all's neck of the woods, and they do something similar. They've got their brewery and you can come in and drink and try their stuff out. But their real goal is they're trying to get distribution. They're trying to get shipments out. And you guys are kind of doing the same thing. You've got this e-commerce model, but because you're storing stuff anyways, and you have to have the inventory, if somebody wants to come in, they're welcome to do it. But you're definitely going for the supply distribution, not the tea experience at your shop. So I really like that. It seems pretty savvy, and especially at this time, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Our business model is to be an e-commerce tea company where people order our tea and we ship it to them.
Okay, before we go any further on this, I've actually got to talk about my experience a little bit with the tea. So I'm actually sipping on some of the Amba. I think it's called Amba tea. It's the Amba Thieves tea, and so I just refer to it as the Thieves tea. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there. But I am absolutely loving that. I also have some of the Black Mountain Dragon, probably also butchered the order there, and then some of the Paxson Stardust. And all three of them are so unique and so interesting and so different. And I'm just blown away by each one of them. And Brandon is not sponsoring us for this. This is truly, I am just head over heels for this tea and just all the differences. You know, the Paxson has this long, interesting loose leaf kind of thing going on with it. And then the Dragon is this really tight ball, and the Thieves is just this weird powdery thing that I have not really seen as a tea form before. And they're all loose leaf, so it's just cool steeping them and seeing how they come out and how they taste and all the joy and subtlety around the teas that you guys are producing. So with that said, and I hope it didn't go too far there, but do you have a favorite tea that you're drinking, or something you're working on that you're like, this is really great, and anything like that?
That's like asking, like, which child is your favorite?
Well, the oldest, obviously.
No, yeah, right, yeah. Well, Billy here's my favorite. No, it depends on the mood I'm in. I will say this: if I had to be banished to a desert island and I only got to pick one type of tea to take with me for the rest of my life, I'd go with black tea. That is sort of my go-to. That's my comfort zone. My comfort drink is black tea, and it just we have a dozen of them, and it just depends on the mood I'm in. I'll give you a couple that I've been drinking lately that have been kind of my favorites. So this first, I have been drinking a green tea called Lin Nam War Elephant, which is our new green tea. It's a wild green tea from far north Vietnam. It's handpicked, comes from 300 to 400-year-old trees that are wild growing. So the War Elephant, that's our new green tea. I've been drinking that. And then I've also been drinking a couple of our newer black ones. One is called Sinharaja Black from Sri Lanka, and the other is called Mughal Horseman's Tea, which is from Bangladesh. And I really love those two black teas, but it really depends on the mood I'm in. And like you said, they're all so very different. There's so many different ways to make tea, and they all are just they're entirely different. I try to mix it up.
Well, that's one of the cool things about tea is you've got this variety. You got your afternoon tea, your morning tea, all this different stuff. And there's just, in my mind, compared to coffee, there's a lot more nuance into what's going on. So, it's kind of, I'm like a tea guy versus a coffee guy sort of thing for me.
Let me say something about that. So a lot of times people think there's this tension between like tea and coffee, and are you a tea person or a coffee person? I don't drink coffee much, but I look at it as different. Coffee is a very solitary drink. It's a drink you have on the way into the office, or people don't talk to me till I've had my coffee, that sort of thing. Tea, on the other hand, is a more social drink. I tend to look at the two as coffee is the go drink and tea is the stop drink. Coffee is what, like, when you're like, let's go, I'm ready to go, let's seize the day, like, I want my coffee. Tea, on the other hand, is more let's chill out and hang out and have some good conversation and talk about politics and religion and anything else. Or at the end of the day, I want to sit back and watch a movie or something and have a cup of tea. Like, you wouldn't really necessarily do that with coffee. So yeah, coffee is sort of the go drink and tea is the stop drink. When you want to just stop and reflect and chill out and hang out with people, do it over tea. And so there's really nothing wrong with, your first drink of the day can be coffee, and then you have afternoon tea. Like, I love, for as much as I sort of bag on like British tea culture and the doilies and the scones and big hats and all that, I love afternoon tea. Tea is just a great drink. Like, when it's the middle, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's too early to go home from work, but you've had a long day, to just chill out for half an hour. Let's put on heat up some water and share a cup of tea. And it's really great for that.
One of the ways that you actually caught my attention was you had this ad I saw on Facebook, and I've got a marketing background to an extent. And when I see a really cool ad, especially one that really targets me well, I'm like, oh, I want to see what's going on here. And tea is a big thing for me, and Musashi is a big thing for me. And he is this Japanese samurai hero, spirit of Japan kind of thing. So I saw this ad saying, Musashi drinks tea, and I just had to dig into it, and I thought it was just a great ad, and I loved it, and I ended up getting the tea because of the ad, and that's what kind of led us down this rabbit hole in the whole place. So since then, I've noticed a lot of y'all's ads kind of have this warrior hero kind of thing going on. So with that said, is there one of these people that you relate to most or kind of like the best?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little background on just that whole ad campaign we did. So I've always chafed at the idea. Let me say this: the tea drinking in the U.S. is very feminized versus tea in the rest of the world. Like in the outside of the U.S., everybody drinks tea, everybody drinks coffee. There's just not much to it. But for whatever reason, like here in the U.S., coffee is the manly, masculine drink, and tea is seen as sort of a softer type deal for whatever reason. You can see that in the branding, the marketing, in the grocery store. You can see that, and I always sort of chafed at that because my experience, my introduction to tea culture was very different. I learned tea culture drinking it with, Afghans and Iraqi fighters with bandoliers of AK-47 rounds heading into combat and drinking tea, before they go into combat. That was my introduction to tea. I've always found sort of the American view of tea very interesting. And so we got the idea, let's push back on that a little and let's show some people a different side of tea. So we went and found these warrior hero figures, not just men, but men and women in history who either were documented to have drank tea or who we presumed drank tea. And we put them in ads, and Musashi was one of them. And people love them. Like they love the ads. And then we expanded it to not just be warriors. We added Jesse Owens, Susan B. Anthony, George Orwell, Fyodor Dostoevsky, other folks like that who drank tea.
That is just so cool because as a person, again, who likes tea, I guess it's not seen as manly necessarily. Not that there's necessarily a kind of, I don't really know what that concept I'm trying to say is, but yeah, people look down on tea drinkers to a sense. It's just not a thing that people appreciate about other people, but you do. You have all of these historical figures, these warriors. Musashi was doing all this really cool stuff. I just read his book this past summer, and, it's 300 years old or something, and he's doing all these different things in it. Then I'm like, this is a guide that modern health gurus are having us pay thousands of dollars to shell out this wisdom. And it's over here in this book from this Japanese samurai warrior. So all of these people had impact and they drank tea, and it's this really cool way to shift like, hey, there's nothing wrong with tea. Like, stop making it this fight. If you want to enjoy tea, there are a lot of really cool, really impactful historical figures that have also enjoy tea. So don't feel bad about it. Like, the rest of the world doesn't have this weird conundrum that America does with tea. So I'm really glad to see that you guys are actually making a concentrated effort and not just, targeting people like me who are like, oh, there's a samurai sword and there's tea. I would like that. Before we start wrapping up on everything with the tea and that kind of stuff, I want to shift you a little away from actually drinking tea to the more CEO, starting a business as an entrepreneur after a writing career, after a military career, all that kind of stuff. So what was it actually like, and how did you kind of go about starting your own business? Was it really fun? Was it easy?
It's terrifying. So most people, a lot of people, most people I don't even know, when they start a company, they start the company while they still have their other job, which is what they tell you to do. But I didn't do that. I quit my career and was like, I'm going to start a tea company, and literally ran a Kickstarter to raise the startup funds for the company, and we were successful. But I will say this about starting a company: if I had known then what I know now, I never would have done it because I'd have been too scared. I'd have been too scared to do it. Yeah, it's really hard. And I don't say that to dissuade people from doing it. If this is your thing, if you want to start a company and you have that desire and that drive and the resources, then absolutely do it. But everybody needs to go into this with their eyes open. This is by far the hardest thing I've ever done. And that includes combat, full contact politics. This is the most difficult thing I've ever done. But at the same time, it's the most rewarding. I could never go back to corporate life after this. So there's so many adjectives. It's fun, it's terrifying, it's rewarding, it's invigorating. I don't know. I love it. I love taking risk anyway. Boy, I don't know. It is definitely a challenge though. And there have been times in the last 3.5 years since we started doing this, that I have been like, oh my God, what did I get myself in? Like, what an enormous mistake this was. But then things turn around and you're like, no, this is going to take off. This is going to work. And that those days make it all worth it.
Speaking of all the adjectives, you guys probably just had a adjective-filled week with this past snowstorm. So I think you guys got shut down, right? Has that been something interesting or hard, or was that fun to take care of? Were you in the back stocking stuff? Like, how'd that go?
So yeah, so we were shut down. So the business was shut down for 3.5 days, and we had hundreds of orders backed up, and we had no electricity, no water in the building, and orders just kept coming in. That was scary watching just orders just keep coming in. There was nothing we could do about it, and it took us about a week to clear the backlog once the power came back on. But yeah, that was a challenging week. That kind of disrupted February a little. But at the same time, I should say this: a lot of people had it a lot worse. People did not survive it. So we're all healthy and safe, and every business and home are intact, so I can't complain too much.
Yeah, it's definitely a great and important mindset to have, I think, is there are tough things, but there's always somebody that has a little bit worse, and the important thing is finding that next step forward. And so you've talked about how hard it is to start a business, and I feel like it takes, a special type of person, special type of personality to do that. So I'm curious, how much do you know about the whole like Enneagram number thing, or like Myers-Briggs personality test? Do you know where you fall in any of that? Just so that, if a listener is like, hey, you know what, that sounds good to me, and actually I kind of relate to Brandon in these things, maybe I should start a business.
I don't know a lot about the Enneagram numbers or Briggs-Meyer. I mean, I'm familiar with both, but I don't know where I fall in any of them. To me, it's not about necessarily just finding where you fall on the graph. It's more, is this something that you can't live without doing? And if you just have that passion and drive, then just do it and just figure it out on the fly. You're going to spend a lot of money learning business. Whether you get an MBA or you do it by trial and error, you're probably going to spend about the same amount of money. That was a hard lesson for me because, I don't have an MBA, and people spend a lot of money on MBAs. And people told me, oh, you don't need an MBA. And I was like, okay, we'll do this. So we have made so many mistakes that have cost us so much money that I realized that you really are going to spend about the same amount of money regardless. Either spend the money on an MBA and learn it that way, or do it by trial and error, and you're going to just burn cash making mistakes, but you're going to learn from them. And I feel like I could teach courses on this stuff now just based off the lessons that I've learned in the last 3 years.
Okay, so I don't disagree that you could get both, but I am sure that there is some kind of impression that is made whenever you see your own cash going up in flames versus paying the tuition and learning in a classroom. I bet things stick a little bit better with you on what you learn whenever it's your money.
No, that's absolutely true. Watching your money just in flames, and you're just like, wow, that's not going to ever do that again.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. It was really fun getting to chat with you. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I really hope you guys do some awesome stuff with Rakkasan Tea. I know Daniel and I are both very excited to see you whenever things kind of blow over and we're able to come and visit and see what your tea looks like in-house and try it out. So to everybody listening, thank you for joining us. We hope you all have a great time and a great week. And your challenge, because I'm going to speak for Brandon here since he didn't get a chance to throw a challenge out for you, go try and drink some tea this week. If you haven't had tea in a while, or you think you're a coffee person, let's go brew a nice cup of green tea or black tea or whatever you're feeling and replace one of those cups of coffee with it and see how it goes. I know personally I've tried this pretty recently, and drinking tea versus coffee has done nothing bad, and it's had some really good side effects. If you're interested about that, go ahead and reach out to me and I can give you more details. Thanks, guys, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.